I'm Jack.stucker. I'm with Regional Housing Legal Services. I'll start with a little bit of an introduction of who Regional Housing is. I'll give you some background on myself, and then we'll jump into the presentation. So Regional Housing Legal Services is a Pennsylvania legal aid network specialty program. What does that mean? It means we're a legal aid organization, like ones you might be familiar with, Community Legal Services or PLA. That means we're a nonprofit group of lawyers, and our client base are nonprofit organizations. So like traditional legal aid that you might have experience with or comes to mind when you think about it, representing tenants in eviction hearings or helping folks get access to public benefits, they don't charge for their services. That's how we're like legal aid. Our services are free. We're different than some of the traditional legal aid in that our client base are not low-income individuals, but they're community groups that serve low-income individuals. We're also different in some ways in that a lot of legal aid services are appeal-based and litigation-focused, and our services are almost exclusively transactional. So pretty much as a rule, we don't litigate. We sometimes help with dispute resolution processes when they come up, but we do our best to try and avoid having to get there. The vast majority of our work is transactional in nature. So we're negotiating contracts on behalf of our clients. We're helping folks understand their compliance requirements when they're participating in different programs, and ultimately closing affordable housing deals. About 50% of our work is that direct transactional services, working deals and getting them to the closing table. The other half of our work is working with clients on non-deal matters. So they may be negotiating a new management agreement for properties in their portfolio. They may be working with their local jurisdiction to advance affordable housing policies. So we spend a reasonable amount of time supporting clients with legal expertise in that way as well. Our mission is to work alongside communities. We'd like to make sure that the clients are forward. Our role as attorneys is to support a client's mission and services, but we are mission focused on creating and protecting affordable homes to advance our vision where everyone, regardless of income, race, identity, or background, has a safe, affordable house and a place that they want to live. I love saying this because we just finished a almost 2-year-long strategic planning process where we spent a lot of time workshopping that. But I think it really encapsulates the reason for existence of Regional Housing Legal Services. That's what we're purpose-driven to do. Regional Housing Legal Services has been around we're about to celebrate our 55th anniversary. So we've been around for a long time. We started our work just outside of Philadelphia, representing a group of tenants in a community that was facing really severe maintenance problems, and helped them organize to improve the conditions of the housing that they were living in, and over the course of our history have grown into this specialized transactional legal practice. Personally, I joined Regional Housing in 2012. So I came right out of law school. I went to Drexel here in Philadelphia, and was awarded an Independence Foundation Fellowship to start work at Regional Housing, focused on supporting clients developing housing solutions for folks facing homelessness. So that was the start of my career with Regional Housing. After I was with Regional Housing for a couple of years, I actually left. I went to my home state of Delaware and worked on the government side. I was at the Delaware State Housing Authority, which was both a public housing authority in the traditional sense of owning and operating public housing, but was also a housing finance agency in Pennsylvania. It's PHFA, and we'll get into that some more, but it's Delaware's version of PHFA. So it allocates a lot of the affordable housing resources throughout the state of Delaware. After I was there for a little while, there was an opportunity to come back to Regional Housing Legal Services, which is where I've landed now about 3 years ago. A couple of disclaimers I want to start with for this presentation. Can I?
Yes, please.
I'm gonna hurt myself. I started my practice at Regional Housing focused on supporting clients developing solutions for folks facing homelessness. As I've continued my practice, I have tended to focus on rental housing development, almost exclusively multifamily, with a kind of specialty in the supportive housing services enriched developments. I know that might not be the most on-point topic for the audience today, so I'm going to do my best to focus on some things that I think will be relevant for the group here. I can't help myself. I'm going to start with an overview of the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which is the center of gravity in most affordable housing development. It is a multifamily housing development tool that usually is for larger scale developments of at least 50 units or more, but it can take all sorts of varieties of forms. There are low-income housing tax credit developments that are downtown high-rise buildings that have 120 units in them, but there are scattered site low-income housing tax credit developments that are groups of single-family homes throughout a block, maybe even not contiguous together, where the LIHTC program can help subsidize them. So I am going to devote some time to the structure of the LIHTC program because I think it evidences one of the primary ways in which affordable housing is financed. I'm going to then transition into a brief overview of Mayor Parker's home initiative, some of the programs that are involved with that I think probably are very immediately relevant and usable for what I understand the main interest of the group here tonight is. My disclaimer is that we do have attorneys at Regional Housing that focus on single family and home ownership development. I'm not one of them. So I understand these programs and can provide some overview, but I'm not going to be able to provide a lot of detailed, this is my experience working with that program, because that's not my practice area necessarily. I'm very open to questions, so if something's coming up while I'm talking, feel free to interrupt me or throw a hand up. And I've planned the presentation to leave a reasonable amount of time for dialogue at the end of this. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to get through my slide deck pretty quickly here, and then we'll be able to have a conversation where I'm very open to doing the best I can to answer any questions that you may have on your mind that are relevant to you. Let's start with just getting a little bit of a sense in the room. I know we had hands up for first JUMPinar attendees. Can I get a sense of who in the room considers themselves either a current or aspiring developer? Is that most of us? Sorry? Jumpstart, so Jumpstart graduate? All right. I know we've got at least one lender in the room. Any other two lenders in the room? Terrific. Any contractors? Government officials? No, none of them? Good, so I can talk about Philadelphia and not getting all right, that was helpful. I just wanted to get a sense of where we are. So I'm like I said, we're starting with the low-income housing tax credit development. It's what I call a bricks and sticks program. It is a tool for financing the construction of affordable housing. So it doesn't provide operation subsidy, but it helps with the bricks and sticks of the building. It's been around since 1986. This is a period in time when there was really strong public backlash against traditional public housing, and the low-income housing tax credit was a bipartisan concept That was a public-private partnership and sort of was developed as a counter to these anti-public housing sentiments that were going on at the time. Interestingly, although it is the center of gravity, sort of the flagship affordable housing program in our country, it's not administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development like you might expect. It's a tax credit, so it's administered by the IRS. So the largest source of affordable housing development in our country is an IRS program. The low-income housing tax credit typically finances, there's some nuance to what type of tax credit you're using, but for our purposes, I'll talk about the main tax credit, the 9%, which doesn't matter what that means, just know the 9% is the big tax credit. Funds roughly between 60 to up to 75 or 80% of the development. So the tax credit itself is not sufficient. You've got to layer in other sources of funding. And that's where you usually do have some HUD financing involved. So as a developer's putting together a tax credit deal, they're looking at what are those sources of gap financing to be able to make the project viable to get built. The main administering entity for the low-income housing tax credit is the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. So that's the state housing finance agency. IRS gives PHFA an allocation of tax credits on an annual basis, but developers and users of the program rarely, if ever, are interfacing directly with IRS. PHFA is the main administrative body that folks using the program in Pennsylvania are going to interact with, in addition to their other sources of funding. It is about 90%, this is a nationwide statistic, of affordable housing that's developed. So the vast majority of affordable rental housing that's developed is done in partnership with the low-income housing tax credit program. The basic structure of the low-income housing tax credit program starts with PHFA awarding tax credits to developers through a competitive process called the Qualified Allocation Plan, which I'm going to take some time talking about briefly, but not too in-depth. At that point, developers have to partner with investors because the tax credit's exactly what it sounds like. It's a tax credit, so it's a write-off of your tax balance. It's not cash, it's not a direct subsidy. A tax credit doesn't do anything to give you money to build a building. What it does do is give an opportunity to attract investors where that tax write-off is valuable to them. The investors contribute to the program by providing equity up front, which becomes the source of funds that a developer is using to construct the housing. Almost all tax credit developments are structured as a limited partnership or limited liability company with the investor as that silent partner, but very critically, the actual owner of the project. So for a low-income housing tax credit development, the developer itself at closing does not own the project, the investor does. So that's a really important component to understand of how tax credits are structured. The developer is usually involved as a general partner or managing member of that ownership entity, and that means they're responsible for the day-to-day operation of the project. So at initial deal closing, that means managing the general contractor, getting the building built, getting the building rented up, and then ongoing, that means making sure that the development maintains compliance with the obligations of the tax credit program. So while the investor is the ultimate owner of the project, the general partner is the one with all of the responsibility for making sure that the construction and development goes smoothly and ultimately the project stays in compliance with the tax credit obligations. This is a little bit of a flow chart to understand that. I think the next slide here is an example of a sort of typical low-income housing tax credit organizational chart. So here the general partner would be the entity owned by the developer. So that's the person who's applied to PHFA, the driving force behind the project that's getting the housing built. They're going to own a 0.01% share of the project, with the limited partner owning essentially the entirety of the project. That's true during the period in which the tax credits are provided. But one important component of the low-income housing tax credit program is there's an opportunity after the tax credits are exhausted and the investor's no longer receiving the benefit of those tax credits. There's an opportunity, it's called right of first refusal, where the developer purchases the project from the investor, usually for a relatively nominal sum. That can't happen before year 15 of the project, usually between year 15 and 20. Why is that important? I think for a developer that's interested in building a portfolio of properties that they own, the low-income housing tax credit project is a very long-term investment. You're looking at year 16, that you have the opportunity to purchase that project back from the investor. It's going to continue to have compliance and affordability obligations, but at that point, the original developer can be the owner of the housing that they put the work in to help get built. Like all government funding programs, the low-income housing tax credit comes with restrictions. Unlike a lot of other affordable housing programs, the rent and income limits are tied to the building, not the individuals living in the unit. So the rent is not adjustable based on an individual's income like a housing choice voucher would be, or like public housing is, because the tax credits aren't providing an ongoing source of subsidy to the developer and owner. They provided that initial money for construction costs, and from that point on, the obligations are to charge no more than a maximum amount of rent that PHFA sets, and to not rent those units to households that are over a certain income limit. What that does mean, unfortunately, is a lot of times there are folks in low-income housing tax credit developments where the housing is not truly affordable to that household because the rent's not adjusted based on their individual household income. It's just set at a maximum rent level. So while that can help project stability and it's a benefit to the developer and the owner that they know with predictability what their rental income is, it can be a detriment to the tenant. And that's why we often see the tax credit paired with other sources of subsidy that can help make the housing more affordable. I mentioned briefly, as PHFA is awarding the tax credits, that's done through a competitive process in what's called the qualified allocation plan. It's a term of art that every state's required to have. So every state's got a low-income housing tax credit program, and every state has a qualified allocation plan. That's about where the similarities end. The LIHTC program is, the responsibility for it is highly devolved to the state level. So unlike a lot of other federal programs where a federal agency is dictating most of the rules related to the program, the low-income housing tax credit program is very tailored and unique on a state-by-state basis. And the primary way in which the state expresses its public policy intention for what type of housing is getting done in the LIHTC program is through the qualified allocation plan. The qualified allocation plan is a hyper-technical, very dense document. I think this year is approaching 80 pages long, and it contains both lots of very detailed financial information about what the qualified basis for the tax credit are in the development, maximum award amounts, but it also expresses a lot of public policy preferences of PHFA. I think most relevant to the audience here today is there are incentives for emerging developers that are looking to start working in the low-income housing tax credit program. It's a complicated program that involves large-scale development. So for a first-time developer going for a low-income housing tax credit, alone is not a good idea and probably not likely to be successful. But the qualified allocation plan contains preferences for partnerships, where there are opportunities for more experienced developers to partner with less experienced developers to get a project done. That might involve someone, national group that does affordable housing development all around the country, looking for a local partner that knows the community, the neighborhood, the politics, and the politicians to help shepherd a project through, where the national developer is going to bring the technical expertise to do like underwriting and compliance for the tax credit program, where a local partner is bringing the community knowledge to help advance the design to make sure that the housing that's being built fits the needs of the community and help shepherd it through approval processes. As my brief public service announcement is that the qualified allocation plan is currently right now open for comment. So PHFA has posted a draft qualified allocation plan on their website. I've got a link to it here. The slides will be provided. I think for this community, there potentially would be an interest in commenting around that emerging developer preferences in the qualified allocation plan to help expand access to the program. For folks that are interested in affordable housing development, there are ways to do affordable rental housing without the low-income housing tax credit program, but they're relatively few. Because it's such a complicated program, it does have a pretty high barrier to entry. So I personally think the emerging developer priority that PHFA does express in their qualified allocation plan is really important to democratize access to the low-income housing tax credit program, because it's a hyper-technical and complicated tax credit financing mechanism shouldn't mean that only highly experienced big national players have access to it. So I want to really encourage folks to not necessarily try and tackle a low-income housing tax credit deal if that doesn't make sense for you or your goals, but if working in the multifamily or rental affordable housing space is something that you are interested in, to start thinking about that and thinking about ways in which emerging developers and partnerships could potentially benefit your ability to access that program. I think that is the end of my talk about the tax credit program. So thanks for bearing with me on that. I appreciate it. Are there any questions about low-income housing tax credit or what that looks like? I got in the back here and then right here.
Could you just go back to the slide that showed the, I guess the structure or
And better yet, we're going to send out the slide deck to everyone afterwards. So as long as you RSVP, you'll get Jack's slides.
Yep.
The one before that. Thank you.
So this flow chart here is describing where the tax credits ultimately start with the IRS, and it's a population-based formula for how many tax credits are available. So every year on an annual basis, the IRS will issue PHFA a notice letter based on the population of how many tax credits they have to award. PHFA is required to have the qualified allocation plan, which is, you can think of it like an RFP. It's the public process to apply for tax credits. After developers submit their proposals, PHFA ranks them. It's a point-based scoring process and issues award letters to folks that score the highest in their ranking. There's a couple of threshold things where PHFA says no more than 50% of tax credits go to urban projects. The other 50% go to suburban and rural, but otherwise it's just a straight point-based system. Once the developer receives that award, then it's time for them to go to the market and solicit for an investor. So developers will put out their own RFPs, which say, I got an award of this many tax credits, and it's typically institutional investors, banks and community development finance institutions that'll reply to that with an offer of how much money they're going to provide. Then you're off to the races to get the project to closing, start construction, and rent it up. Good. Another one here?
Yeah, I have a question about the structure. There's a general partnership and limited partnership. So as a limited partner, what is the minimum amount you can invest?
For the limited partner of,
The limited partnership. I think the slide before that or after?
yep. Yeah, so that was that equity solicitation process that I was describing is what'll control what that limited partner's investment is. So the developer's tax credit will be based on what they've awarded from PHFA. The tax credit is a 10-year cycle. So if you get a $1 million award of tax credits, that's $1 million for 10 years. So it's really $10 million of tax credits total. The investor then will offer a price for those tax credits, which varies based on the market. In really good years, investors offer close to $1 for dollar for the tax credits. In leaner years, or depending on the market conditions or the tax landscape for investors, sometimes that pricing is as low as 70 cents on the dollar. So while the tax credit's been a highly successful program, mostly because it's received like bipartisan support and is sustainable, it's not the most economically efficient, because even in good years, you're getting 90 or 95%. So it's like for every dollar of tax revenue foregone, you're getting maybe 90 cents worth of affordable housing. But how much that limited partner investor is putting into the project is a factor of how many tax credits the project received and what the market conditions were that impact the price.
So, just trying to wrap my head around this. So let's say a person identifies a property. It'll all have like 6 units in it, but they need funds to, remodel or develop it. The investor basically would own that property. And the person who, is trying to develop it, they own 1% of it? Is that right?
Less than 1%. They own substantively none of it. They 0.01 to be a participant, but.
So, long term, how does the developer financially benefit from the process? I'm helping with that.
Terrific question. Two ways primarily. One, the tax credit program itself involves developer fees. So the developers that put all the work in to actually make the application, get the deal done, be responsible for navigating the relationship with the general contractor, sort of as compensation for that. The tax credits themselves will subsidize a developer fee, where the developers gets paid directly for the work involved in that. Ultimately, there's 15 years of tax credit. There's 10 years of delivery, 5 years where the tax credits can be recaptured. After that, the investors look to exit the projects, and that's where there's a right of first refusal process for nonprofit developers to be able to acquire the project for a nominal cost, usually. So by maintaining the role as general partner, 15 to 20 years later, ultimately the developer usually ends up owning the property outright, even though it's still subject to income limitations. So it can help for long-term motivated developers to build a portfolio that they do economically own. Yep.
Before you put the application in for the credits, you have to already have your property lined up, or is this like kind of like you take them and bank them and then find a property after that, so then you know what you're working with?
Yeah, no, terrific question. Yeah, you do need to have a property lined up. You have to be able to. That's a policy choice that PHFA has made. Other states are less stringent with their threshold requirements, which is sort of like what you need to even make the application. But you need to evidence site control. That does not have to be in the form of owning the property. It can be that you have an agreement of sale that's binding, but you have. By the time you're putting in a LIHTC application, it's got to be a pretty well developed concept of a project. And then there's often a lot of work for the developer. You wanted $1.5 million of tax credits, and PHFA awards you 1.2, and now how do you figure out how to make your project work when that happens? Yeah.
Does the investor, or do you have any history of investors also being the property managers, so they know what the property they're getting 20 years later versus not being involved for 20 years, even though they have the first right of refusal, they don't know what state that property's in at that point?
So the investor is who's usually exiting at 20 years. The general
The general partner, sorry.
Yeah, so the general partner, very commonly will also self-manage the property is what we would call it. So they'd be responsible themselves for doing everything around maintenance and renting. The alternative is to hire a management agent, but the general partner, the developer here, is ultimately responsible for navigating the relationship with the management agent. So the sort of like buck stops with the general partner there in that sense. So even if they're not self-managing it, they're still involved during that 20-year period in how the property is being managed. And if the management company is not doing a good job, that's the type of thing that regional housing will help navigate. We've had to work and terminate a management company that wasn't doing a good job, and there's going to be, but the general partner is very much involved, whether or not they're managing themselves or just overseeing a company.
And that's usually over the whole term of that contract.
Yeah, ideally, like management companies want to be doing that for the entire term of
Right.
the period. If something's going wrong, it's not always true, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So what if the developer owns the property outright? And then they partner with a, limited partner for investment purposes for developing it into what they envision.
Yep.
Is that split still less than 1%, 90?
Yeah, I think the scenario you're describing would be some form of either adaptive reuse, so a developer owns a warehouse or an old school and they want to turn it into affordable housing and attract an investor through here. Yeah, the ultimate ownership interest would still be the same at the end of the tax credit process, though.
Is there a certain number of units that they want to see that you're going to develop? Is there a threshold on that? Maybe we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I think I have to check. The QAP just came out last week. I think the minimum is 40 units.
40?
Yep. And that's on an application basis. So a lot of tax credit developments are single site based, where you have 40 units in a building or sort of a cottage style apartment complex. But it's perfectly allowable in the tax credit program for there to be 40 units, say, that are scattered site. So we worked a deal in Mantua where they were single family homes spread out over 3 or 4 different blocks and totaled up to 47 units that were packaged together in one tax credit application. So the 40 units doesn't have to be a single building with 40 units in it, but the project as a whole needs, and that really, the economy of scales, because it's a pretty complicated program. There's a lot of sunk costs in navigating the relationship with the investor that just make it economically infeasible to do much smaller than that.
That 40 unit scattered site arrangement, how did you secure the sites? Who gave you the land? Were you bought the land?
Yeah, it was a sort of long-term portfolio acquisition. A reasonable amount of those properties came from the land bank, and other ones were acquired over time by the developer, purchased, but I think there were maybe 13 or 14 of them, don't quote me on that, were land bank properties. So they were received into the development for free, essentially, from the land bank. in exchange for the agreement that they'd be developed into affordable housing.
Were any of them required eminent domain?
I don't believe so. I don't know the ultimate, how they originally ended up in the land bank. I'm not sure. There was no eminent domain involved in the tax credit transaction, but I don't want to say that there wasn't a situation. Some of the properties I think had been city owned for 15 or 20 years and were vacant. So I don't know the history of when they originally became city owned properties.
Another question.
Yep.
You said some of the QAP asked for developer to have some emerging developers.
Right.
So how do you get on that list of emerging developers, and how do you link up with the people who are looking for emerging developers? How do those folks meet?
Yeah, there's not a sort of process, although I think that's a terrific idea that maybe we should advocate for, is to have there be a list of emerging. Huh?
Right?
Yeah, tell them to come here and talk to the Jumpstarters. So the way those connections are made are just relational. The way that I've worked with clients, I think a typical client profile that would be an emerging developer that I've worked with might be a faith-based organization where you've got a small congregation that owns some parcels adjacent to a sanctuary, and they'll put out a request for proposals that they'll publicize, on online forums to essentially say we're looking for a developer partner.
What do you mean the person, the faith-based, or anybody
Right.
who has a parcel?
Yep.
Might put an RFP on?
Right, and say, so the RFP would look something along the lines of, we have site control over this property, looking for a partner with experience and capacity to develop it into affordable housing. And then part of the work that I do for clients is help to negotiate what that joint development agreement would look like. Ultimately, for the economic benefit here, what's the share of the developer fee look like for that when you've got an emerging developer that has a more experienced developer partner coming in? We know if it's a tax credit deal, the ultimate ownership, at least for the first 15 years, is going to be with the investor. But there's upwards of approaching $2 million of developer fee on the table in a lot of tax credit transactions. And what does that look like? But there isn't, at least through PHFA, a centralized sort of emerging developer way to register yourself for interest there.
So
But
there's not something like that?
there's not. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so, you said that the investor gets $1 for $1 in good times,
Right.
so he essentially he's not getting anything.
Yeah, the economic benefit to the investor is they're usually not doing that. Often they're offering 85 or 90 cents on the dollar for tax credit, so they give you 90 cents up front and then get a full dollar off of their taxes that year. So that's where they're making their money.
Is that lucrative for an investor?
Yeah, particularly as the tax credit program has grown, there's a pretty robust kind of specialized industry of investors that have figured out how to make quite a lot of money with tax credit investments. So yeah.
So
Jack, I just
Yep.
want to give you a quick time check. We got 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yep.
Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm happy to talk more about the economics of investors, but yeah, let me.
Jack will be able to stick around afterwards for some Q&A. So
Yep.
no worries on time. I just want to make sure you get through the slides.
Oh, you got one.
Yeah, no, I do have a little more. Although this is I think the conversation for this is going to be more important than my presentation, because as the sort of disclaimer I made, I haven't worked directly with many of these programs, but I'm aware of them. We've got folks in our office that meet and have conversations with a lot of our attorneys that do work these programs. But I wanted to spend some time talking about Mayor Parker's home program. I'm personally very frustrated with the choice of name here. because HOME is both a federal program administered by HUD. There's also a pretty experienced affordable housing developer in Philadelphia called Project Home. So I think there's just a confusing title for it. It's on point. It's housing, home. It makes sense. I think one of the critical things is that Parker's Home Initiative is not a program itself. It's the branding around a package of programs. So there is no apply to the Philadelphia Home Program for affordable housing resources. Home is just sort of the umbrella branding that the mayor's office is using to advance their portfolio of policy and program priorities to try and increase affordable housing. So it's an exciting initiative by the mayor. Certainly in Philadelphia, affordable housing has become increasingly recognized by politicians and community groups as a critical emergency. So seeing the concerted effort of the mayor in the home program is great. I just wish she had chose a different name for it. These are just a couple of the programs that are part of the Home Initiative. Some of these programs have existed for a long time and are not new, but they're receiving increased attention and funding as part of the mayor's Home Initiative. Many of the programs in the Home Initiative are focused on individual homeowners and creating more affordability and access for them. So basic systems repair and adaptive modifications programs are targeted towards homeowners being able to maintain and improve their home. There's a package of available mortgage financing products that help make homeownership more affordable by providing subsidies directly to homeowners looking to purchase homes. And there's the Turn the Key program, which I'm going to talk a little more about here because I think that's probably relevant to a lot of the types of projects that get talked about in the JUMPinar program. Turn the Key is also primarily a two-part program that's designed both to make the home purchase more affordable for the homeowner. So it provides direct mortgage buy-down assistance to make the price of the home lower for the homeowner, but it's also in partnership with the Philadelphia Land Bank to help dispose of that publicly held property and turn it into productive use as affordable housing. For a developer interested in taking the land bank property and turning it into affordable housing, the way in which Turn the Key can be beneficial is a little bit of a two-step. There's not a process as a developer to apply to the Turn the Key program to do this. The property disposition is through the land bank process, and as you apply to the land bank, you can register the interest and ultimately having it be a Turn the Key property, but there's not a Turn the Key portal for a developer interested in using that property. The public-facing Turn the Key program is primarily geared towards that homeowner assistance, so providing a mortgage buy-down. I think where that's really relevant to a developer is that is designed to help close the gap between the price of building the home, redeveloping the home, new construction, and what the market will bear in a lot of those communities. So the data, the publicly available data on the Turn the Key program was the average Turn the Key home. The price started at about $280,000, which is a sale price that the market won't bear in a lot of communities. Turn the Key is able to come in and provide cost assistance and get the average price down to $183,000, so almost $100,000. I think for a developer interested in utilizing land bank property to turn into affordable home ownership, that really provides the exit pathway. So if you're going to invest $250,000 in the construction of the home, You're going to need to sell it for more than that to make any money. Is the home going to be marketable at $280,000? Are you going to be able to identify a buyer? Maybe not. But with the Turn the Key program, that is a system where you can register the program. It's publicly searchable as a Turn the Key property. So it's going to increase the marketability and visibility of the developed project, and it comes with financial assistance to the home buyer to help support them being able to purchase the home and ultimately pay the developer. So the Turn the Key process from a developer's perspective involves the traditional mechanics of applying to the land bank for property, and then working with that to register it as a Turn the Key property, and provides a pathway to marketability and saleability of the home with the support of the Turn the Key program.
So there's a restriction on how much you can sell property.
Your question's perfect. I was just about to. Yeah.
So there's a restriction.
Yeah. The Turn the Key program has income restrictions. So the home can only be sold to folks under 100% of area median income.
But with their home value though is still at the 280. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Are any of these programs applicable to landlords for rentals, or all homeowners?
I don't know.
And the second question, like, is this program like pretty much over when she's out of office? Like,
I don't get my crystal ball here. No, I think probably not. You know, the funding for these programs may not be sustainable long term. The branding of, like, it's very much Parker's home initiative, so I would expect that the branding probably leaves with the mayor. It'd be my hope that the programs don't evaporate with the turn of administration.
Sorry, one final question. How many homes have been sold through the program?
Turn the Key.
Yes, a good bit.
I'm not sure. I'm sure it's available online somewhere,
Yeah.
like quarterly or something. But if I find it, I'll send it out to the followers.
Just curious.
Yeah.
And they did a lot of them in Germantown as well. Some buddy houses. They
We have
did
one here,
in Germantown.
and then I'll come up to you. But yeah,
Okay, so I toured the Turn the Key homes.
yeah.
The neighborhoods are subpar, deplorable. Kensington, you walk outside your front door. My daughter actually just got approved with WSFS. I told her absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was drug addicts as soon as you walk out the front door, in the back door. People were complaining about their furniture being stolen. I mean, this is a wonderful program, but why is it only in the really deplorable, disgusting neighborhoods? It's never in Oak Lane. I have to see it's like maybe 3 in Germantown, and even that area was disgusting. So I just, you know, it's like a wonderful program for young people, but now my daughter's gravitating to where? Delaware, where you're from? Absolutely. Yeah, because it's terrible. I wouldn't even trust my grandchildren to go outside and play. It would be engaging with a needle on the ground. It's terrible. So I would love to talk to Mayor Parker, because, girl, you need to really pick some areas that are nice, you know, where, and in one street, I couldn't even drive my car. I had a small car. I couldn't even drive the car down the street. I'm like, so is this for people who take SEPTA? I mean, you know, what is the goal? Because I don't think she's in reality. She lives in Mount Airy. I know where she lives at. But you want my family to move in Kensington? Absolutely not. No.
I think the question there was, why is this happening in particular neighborhoods as opposed to others?
Disgusting
You know, maybe that could.
Yeah. Let's start.
You're very nice.
I think
I think every neighborhood needs, regardless of what it is.
Yeah, I don't know that I can fully answer that question. Some of it probably is administration priorities of where they want to devote resources. There are 2 things that are definitely motivating it, though, is where is their city-owned land?
Right.
And there tends to be the most city-owned land in economically depressed
Right.
neighborhoods. So there's not a lot of city-owned land in Mount Airy. So that's one of the limiting, and then also developer capacity and demand. I mean, some of this is what's driven by what the developers are going after, and I don't know that I know the market forces for why that is, but I think the portfolio of city-owned land is probably the major contributing factor there. Yeah.
You can just keep the volume down so everybody can hear the question.
The accelerator fund program that you had on another slide.
Yep.
Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Philly Accelerator Fund is receiving support through the Home Initiative. It's a community development financial institution. I know that Jumpstart Philly offers some flexible lending products, and it's another resource. They offer pre-development loans and construction loans, but have more flexible loan approval and project underwriting than sort of a traditional lender might. So they're a CDFI, they're still required to be economically responsible, but they're more mission driven to make the financing products available.
And one thing I'll add to that, I know that the folks at the PAF, the Accelerator Fund, are familiar with Jumpstart, and we've seen some loan applications from people who've looked for or secondary financing from them for the renovation. So I'm sure if you mentioned that you're getting Jumpstart financing for your project, they'd be willing to talk about it. But they are kind of in the same space as us, I think, working on the same sorts of projects, same types, levels of development.
Yeah.
One other thing.
Yeah, one more, and then I see you over
the
here.
gentleman
Go ahead.
right there, I think he asked about for landlords. The rental improvement fund program is where landlords can get their units fixed up at no cost to you. And as long as you keep a tenant, not the same, as long as you keep a tenant for 10 years, you don't have to pay anything back. You don't put any money out either.
That's great.
I think you mentioned PHFA. Do you know of any programs with PHA?
Yeah. I mean the main programs through the Philly Housing Authority that I interact with are most recently there's something called the RAD program, the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, and that's administered through public housing authorities, and that does provide. Where I was discussing how LIHTC doesn't make the rents based on the household income. It's a source of ongoing operating subsidy that provides long-term support to the project. So it's not a capital develop bricks and sticks source of funding, but it's a critical component to maintain operational stability. That's the program that I interact with the most. There's a number of different project-based voucher programs that support affordable housing development that are administered through PHFA, or PHA, sorry.
To answer the question about how many units, as of May, it looks like this article says 415 units were sold and another 200 were under construction. So and it says 1,000 more units have been approved. So.
And who's the bigger developer? I think it's Savetti, right?
Yes, yeah, Mike Thomas said who Savetta Property Group, he gave a JUMPinar a couple of weeks ago, and he's one of the bigger developers doing those. He had the capacity. He talked a lot about how there's an economies of scale with it, where the profit margin on each individual project is slim and very minimal, so you need to do them in bulk to really benefit from it, and his management company has the capacity to do that.
Right.
But from what we've seen, it's not something that a small developer would want to do because it wouldn't be profitable.
Right.
You had one, yeah.
I had a question about the project. How long does it take for a project to be thought of and actually made happen?
Yeah, my go-to is to say from concept to completion for a tax credit program is, again, highly variable, so it's hard to answer, but 5 years.
Any last questions for Jack? One more?
Well, so in a way, this is for
both.
both of you. So
Yep.
how does the Jumpstart funding compare to the funding that Jack was talking about with regard to ownership of the
Yeah,
property.
the Philadelphia Accelerator Fund, or are you talking about the Line Tech? Yeah, so
No.
Jumpstart, you are the owner of the property.
Right.
You're getting a loan in Jumpstart.
Yeah.
We have first lien position,
Right.
but your name is on the deed and you're the owner with a mortgage with Jumpstart, so it's
Okay,
direct, yeah.
okay, so it's okay.
You know, whereas in the tax credit program, they're providing, whereas the Jumpstart is providing lending and debt, the tax credit investor is providing equity, and that's where they're taking that ownership interest in exchange for the equity. So it's but I think we're pretty much at time here. The slides will be distributed, and if anyone's interested in following up, you've got contact information here. I'll hang out for a few minutes here right now, but also always happy to have a conversation. So thanks for the opportunity to present, though.